So hello and welcome to the video. This is part 2, rather the solution to the Python implementation for question 2 of the October-November 2024 9641 paper. So let's jump right in and see what we have here. So question 2 starts by saying a computer program is designed to simulate horses doing short jumping. In short jumping, horses jump over obstacles called fences. A horse successfully jumps a fence if it does not knock the fence down rather. The program is written using OOP. The class horse stores data about the horses. So we are given this diagram right here, the class diagram basically, that's going to detail or explain what our class is going to entail. So we have these fields or these attributes. Then we have these methods inside of our class. So part A, item 1 says that we should write program code to declare the class horse and its constructor. And it explicitly says that we should not declare any other methods here. So we're just going to focus on the horse class as well as its constructor. And for doing that, we are going to be awarded 4 marks. And since we are writing in Python, we should make sure that we put attribute declarations inside of the comments. So let's actually go ahead and look at that right here on this solution that I have going on. Maybe let me just zoom in a little bit so that you can see a bit better. So the solution to question 2A, item 1, is spanning from line number 2 to line number 16 right here. So you can see that we have the class declaration. We are declaring the class horse, rather the horse class, right? And the constructor, remember that the constructor in Python, it begins with the init, right? It's underscore init, then underscore. Then the first argument or the first parameter is always going to be self. This is equivalent to this keyword in Java. So it's going to have the self keyword is the first argument or the first parameter. Then we have the attributes, rather the fields that are specified in this case. So these are name, maximum fence height, and percentage success. So you can see that we are sticking to the Python convention of using underscores whenever we have identifiers that are going to that are made up of several words. Like, for instance, max fence height is made up of 3 words, so we make use of an underscore. That's the Python convention, and it's always a good idea to stick to convention. So convention doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't do it this way, your code is not going to work, right? It simply makes it much more easier when someone looks at your code, they can actually make sense of what you're trying to do. Basically, that's the idea of convention. So you see that we have the attributes right here, and they are private. So there's no way to make these attributes private in Python, unlike in Java where you have the private keyword. In Python, you just declare them like this using self dot, then the name of the attribute. But it is required. If you look right here, it says that if you're using Python, you should include attribute declarations using comments. So that's what we are doing from lines 6 to lines 13, and we are using the multi-line comments. Remember the multi-line comments? Those are the 3 opening and closing quotes, and that's when we can have the multi-line comments. Again, if you want to have a Python refresher, you can always refer to my Python series where I go in, where I take a deep dive into all the Python concepts that you would need to take this course. So having done that, you can go ahead and copy this code from lines 16 to lines 2 and paste it inside of the evidence document, and you'll be awarded 4 marks. Alright, so moving on to item number 2, it says that the get methods getName and getMax fence height each return the relevant attribute. So this would mean that getName is going to return name and getMax fence is going to return the max fence height, as it were. So we have to write program code that's going to implement these get methods. So the solution to this is quite simple, and it's spanning from in my implementation right here, it's going to span from line 19 to line 25. And this is the implementation. So you can see that getName is an argument of self. So remember, self is almost always going to be in every method that you are going to declare that takes arguments. You are not going to put self only when your method doesn't take arguments, but like in the main method you can see that you don't have self because main doesn't take any arguments. But any method that you would expect to take arguments, that includes getters and setters, it's actually going to make use of the self keyword or the self identifier, as it were. So here we are simply returning the name of the host, and we're also getting the maximum fence for that particular host. Then you would go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of your evidence document. Then again, notice how I'm making use of comments, right, to explain what my code is going to achieve. So I'm mentioning that it return the host's name, and this one is going to return the host's maximum jump height. So it's required in Python that you do it this way, because Python it doesn't have return types on the function header right here. Like for instance, if you look at this function, you don't know what it returns, is it? So that's why we need to have these declarations, as it were, written in comments or written using comments. So you can go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Then part B, we are looking at an array called hosts, and it's going to store objects of type host. So we are told that the program has two hosts, namely beauty and chat, and we are given the relevant information for each particular host, and we are supposed to declare an array called hosts, and it's local to the main method, and it's going to store the two hosts described and output the names of the hosts. So let me just scroll down to where I have that implemented right here. So you can see that we have the hosts array, right? So remember that in Python we don't have arrays, is it? Actually we do have arrays, but for Python we just make use of lists, is it? We can make use of lists in place of arrays. So we have the hosts list right here, and it has, you can see that it has two objects of type host, and when we on lines 85 and 86 we are invoking the constructor so that we assign the name, the maximum jump height, as well as the percentage success rate right here. So that's what we are doing on lines 85 and 86. That is for the two hosts that we have, that is beauty and chat. Then remember, these are going to be stored inside of the hosts array, so these are inside of the hosts array. And this part right here, it says that it's local to the main program, so it means that this particular array, or this particular list, as it were, it's going to belong inside of the main method, is it? That's a local variable. So if it were a global, then it would mean that it would be outside of any methods, but because they say that it's going to be local to the main method, it's supposed to be inside of what? Of main right there. So we are storing the two hosts, and we need to output the name of both hosts. So what we are doing, we are continuing on line 88, right, by outputting the hosts. So we are simply using a simple loop to iterate through the names of the hosts, and in this case we are using print with an F. So this basically allows us to print formatted text, as it were. So instead of having to do something like this, like saying print, then you would have to put let's say the name of the host is, right, instead of having to do something like this, then you'd have to go host.getName, is it? We actually don't need to do this because we're using format printing right here. So we simply need to put an F right there, then we put the open and closing quotes, then inside of here we can just put these curly braces. So these are going to be placeholders for whatever getName is going to return. So that's why we are using format printing right there. But of course you can just use this convention on line 92, but format printing is pretty much the standard way of doing it, because it's a bit neater when you're doing it. Like for instance, let's say if you wanted to concatenate a lot of strings, you don't need to worry about having to put to separate your items with a comma, like so. Then maybe let's say you're going to have more output here, then you'd actually need to put a comma, and maybe let's say you wanted to get the host's maximum height, you'd actually need to do something like this. Let me just zoom out a little bit so that you can see the entire line. So you can see that this now would be too long. If you just use an F print, it means that you are simply going to put those curly braces, as well as call the get max fence height method right there. So that's why we are using format printing here. Let me just zoom back in. Okay, so having done that, you can go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document, right? You can go ahead and copy it and paste it inside of the evidence document for 5 marks. Then we are to test our program and take a screenshot of the output for 1 mark. So let's just go ahead and come back to our code. Make sure I'm in the correct directory. Then let me invoke the Python interpreter. Then hit enter. Alright, so for now you can ignore this part right here because it's for the later part of the question. We are just focusing on this one. So you can see that we are just outputting the names of the 2 horses that are in the competition. So we have Beauty and Jet. So that's what we are outputting right there. And yeah, so that would take us to the part where we take a screenshot of this output and paste it inside of evidence document. Then in case you are using an IDE like PyCharm, you don't have to compile or run your code manually like this, is it? You can just press the play button in your IDE, then the code should just run all the same. But I usually use VS Code for the most part, so that's why you see me having to invoke the Python interpreter manually right here. So let me just Control C so that I can force an interrupt, then just clear out the console, then you can close out of the console there. Then part C says here that the class fence stores data about the fences. Each fence has a height in centimeters and a risk number. So the risk is a whole number between 1 and 5 inclusive. A risk of 1 means the fence is the easiest to jump, and then a risk of 5 means the fence is the hardest to jump. Then we are given that class diagram right there. So we are supposed to implement the fence class right here. So let's just go ahead and scroll to where I have that solution. I have it up here, somewhere here, right here on line 47 through 69. That's where I have the class fence, the fence class rather. So again, here we are to declare the class fence, its constructor, and the get methods. Is it? So again, we should include attribute declarations using comments. So we have our class declaration right here on line 47. Then you can see that I'm making use of comments to describe what my class is going to do, is trying to achieve rather. Then we have the constructor right here, right? Also, again, take note of the attribute declarations right here. Then again, same thing here for the get method, that is getting the height, as well as the get method that is getting the risk. Then you would go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Again, when you are watching these videos, I would suggest, if you want to follow along with what's in these videos, you might actually want to pause the video and type the code in your own IDE so that you can test things out, instead of even just to watch it without having to write the code separately, or rather on your own. Okay, so moving on to item 2, we have the array course that stores 4 fence objects. Then the user inputs the height and risk for each fence, and these are validated before each fence is created. So we should amend the main program to declare the local array. Again, local, that's a very important keyword right there. Code course, then it's going to take input as data for 4 fences from the user. It's going to loop the input until both height and risk are valid for each fence. Then we are going to create an instance of a fence once that data has been input. So what I did in this particular instance was to make use of it's not required right here, right? But what I realized is that you can see that these steps are basically repetitive, is it? So whenever you see code that is going to be repetitive, it's always a good idea to package that code inside of a function or inside of a method. So that's what I did right here. So I went ahead and created this method called validate input, and essentially it's going to iterate these 3 steps, is it? Except the declaring the course, the local array code course, right? Rather these 2 things. Let me just highlight these 2 things right here. Is it? It's going to iterate these 2 things, so that I don't have to. I can always reuse this function whenever I want. So you can pause the video and study the code right here, and you should actually see that it's quite straightforward. There's really not much going on inside of here. We just have a loop and some exception handling and a simple decision right there. So let's scroll and take a look at my implementation for this B item. Is this B? Yeah, it's actually C item 2. So right here, right, you can see that we are making a loop, right, that's going to iterate from 1 to 5, is it? Then we are going to call the validate input method right there. Remember, the validate input method is actually making sure that our input is valid for each entry. So that's why we are calling validate input for the height as well as for the risk. Then should our data be validated, that's when we are going to go ahead and append that fence inside of the what? Inside of the course list. Remember, you can always check out my Python series. I talk about how you can add things inside of a list as it were. So we are using append to add the validated data for a particular fence inside of the what? Of the course array as it were. So you can see that the local course array is right here on line 96. That is what we did right here when they said declare the local array called course. So we have that right there on line 96. Then we are repeating the inputting of information and making sure that it's valid before we can create an instance of a particular fence. So you would go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of evidence document. Then let's move on to part D. Part D says here that the chance of a host jumping a fence without knocking it down is calculated as follows. Right, so this is what how the calculation is made. Then they are giving us an example. So we are simply supposed to calculate the success of a particular host. So this method called success is supposed to be inside of the host class. So if I scroll all the way up back to the host class, you can see that we have this calculate success method right here, and it's supposed to do these 3 things right here. So we are going to take the height and risk of a fence as parameters, so that's what we have right here. Then you see I'm describing what my method is trying to achieve. Otherwise, if it were not for these descriptions or these declarations, attribute declarations that we have going on here, it would have been a very short method as it were, or a very short function spanning just about 5 lines or so. But because you have to explain a lot of things in Python, because it misses some keywords, right, like data types and whatnot, you'd realize that you need to make sure that you explain your code, what you're trying to achieve. So essentially, we are just calculating the percentage chances of success for that host jumping the fence without knocking it down, and we are returning the percentage chance of success is a real number. So that's what we are doing right here. So the risk modifiers, we just put them inside of a tuple, then we calculate that and return the chance of success is a real number there. So you'd go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of your evidence document. Then item E, rather part E, item 1, we should amend the main program. So let me scroll all the way down to the main program. So essentially what we need to do is we need to calculate and output the chance of the first host jumping each of the 4 fences without knocking each fence down. And we also need to calculate and output the chance of the second host jumping each of the 4 fences without knocking each of them down. So again, you see that you need to run this code for every object that you have inside of the hosts class. So that's why we are using this for loop on line 106. We are saying that for every host that is inside of the hosts class, we want to calculate its chances for jumping the fences without knocking each of the fences down. And you remember that I think we have about 4 fences in there. So yeah. So then we are given sample output right here that we would want to accompany our output. So we can just follow this template right here when we finally output our information or our calculated chances of success. So you can see right here that we are using F printing or format printing. Remember I said format printing is much easier to use because you don't need to separate your variables with a comma from your string literals. So that's why we are using format printing right there. So this is the code that does these 2 things that are mentioned here. then you would go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. And then we are to write the program code to amend the main program to calculate and output the average chance of success for each horse. So for that, we are going to need this averages array, or this averages list that we have going on line 105, and we need to output the name of the horse that is the highest average chance of success. So the way we are going to do it is we are implementing this logic on line 117 right here. So we are simply finding the index, that is the maximum average, after calculating the averages for the horses, and after that we are simply going to output that code as it were. So you realize that we just need to do that for 2 marks, and we can go ahead and copy this code and paste it inside of the evidence document. Again, if you look closely at the code, you see that there's really not much going on, is it? Besides the F printing, we are just looking at the horse's index and getting the name using our getter and setter methods, rather our getter methods that we had written earlier on. Then item number 3, we are to test our program with the following input data for the 4 fences. So let me just go ahead and open the terminal, invoke my interpreter, then run the code. So the first piece of output you see right here is for the first part of the question. Then for this later part of the question, we are supposed to use that test data. So the height is 152 and the risk is 5. We move on to the next one. Height is 121 and the risk is 1. The height is 130 and the risk is 3. The height is 145 and the risk is 4. So you see that we have our success chance calculations down here in the console, right? So you would go ahead and take a screenshot of this code and paste it inside of the evidence document, and you would have done and dusted question 2. So yeah, I usually don't like these videos to be this long. This one is going just above 20 minutes. So I think that's just about it for this video. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.